Good morning and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. My name is Bhante Suddhaso, and this morning I'll be talking a bit about one of the Buddhist discourses from the Anguttara Nikaya. This is the Dana Mahapala Sutta, which is found in the Anguttara Nikaya Book of the Sevens, Sutta number 52. So I'll start with paying homage to the Buddha, and then I'll talk a bit about this discourse, and then if there's any questions, I'll be happy to respond to questions. So we'll start with homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So as mentioned, we'll be looking at this discourse in Anguttara Nikaya 7.52, the Dana Mahapala Sutta. I won't be going through every word of this discourse, but just focusing on the central aspect of it, which is this list of different ways in which one can give a gift. So the setup for this discourse is that Venerable Sariputta goes to the Buddha and together with a group of monks, a group of lay disciples. So Sariputta was leading a group of lay disciples to go and hear teachings from the Buddha. And the question that was posed to the Buddha is, what is it that makes a gift, a donation, of great fruit and benefit? What is it that produces a lot of good karma when one is making a gift, a lot of good results? What is it that is less beneficial when giving a gift? So this is already starting from the pre-existing idea that an act of generosity is something inherently meritorious, something which inherently is productive of good karma. So the question then is, well, how can one perform acts of generosity? How can one make donations in a way which brings the maximum benefit? And so the Buddha gives a list of different examples of attitudes with which one might make a donation, different attitudes when one might give a gift. So the first example he gives, so in Pali, he says, Ida ekacho sa peko danang deti, patibaddha chitto danang deti, sannidhi peko danang deti, among pecha paribunja samiti danang deti. So this is giving a list of different ways which one might give a gift with. We also have Teddy here, who's giving us the gift of his presence. So ekacho sapeko. Sapeko means with an expectation. So this is giving a gift with an expectation of getting some result. And the next one, patibaddha chitto. This is all one statement here. Patibaddha chitto. Patibaddha means one's mind is bound. So there's some attachment there, attachment to an expected outcome. Sannidhi peko. Sannidhi means a stockpile. Or a treasure trove, a warehouse. So sannidhi peko means you're stockpiling for the future. And this is clarified with the final example in this list. Imang pecha paribunja sami means I will enjoy this after death. I will enjoy this in my next life. So this is the case of someone who gives a gift because they want to get the positive effects of good karma that come from giving a gift. So they give a gift thinking, by giving this gift, I'm stockpiling good karma so that in the future, I will get to enjoy pleasant things like this. There's actually another discourse which this is laid out very clearly in, where there was a lay disciple who would regularly go to the Sangha and was always offering a specific kind of food to the Sangha. And one of the monks asked him, like, why do you always bring this one specific kind of food to offer? And the layperson replied, well, because this is my favorite kind of food, and I want to have lots of it in my next life. It's like, well, okay, that's exactly the kind of mind that the Buddha is talking about here, where one is giving a gift not necessarily out of concern or interest in the other person, but rather because one is trying to generate good karma for pleasant future conditions, in particular, pleasant conditions in one's next life. And so the Buddha does say that this is, in fact, a valuable form of generosity. This is something which brings positive results. The Buddha says that this results in rebirth as a deva. So practicing generosity is something which is always good karma and always leads to good results. So even this kind of limited self-centered attitude of I'm giving a gift just because I want pleasant results in the future life, even giving a gift with that kind of limited mindset is still something which produces a tremendous amount of good karma and leads to rebirth as a deva. Though it's worth noting that the Buddha says that such a person is born as Chatu Maharajika Deva, which is the lowest of the Deva realms. So not particularly lofty of a rebirth, but still significantly better than any human existence. And the Buddha also says that such a person is a returner. So a person who will still, at some point in the future, when their good karma runs out, they will be reborn again as a human or possibly as a lower being, such as an animal or a ghost or something even worse than that. And he gives examples. He gives examples of things that one might do. So he says, so again, with this kind of mind, one might give to samanas and brahmins, so to monks and priests. One might give them food, drink, clothing, transport, ornaments, housing, and light. So this is a standard list of examples of the sorts of things that people would give to spiritual practitioners. And so then the Buddha gives another example of a different kind of attitude with which one might give. So he says that instead, one might think, Dinapubang katapubang pitu pitamahehi na arahami puranang kulavang sangha petong. So one thinks, my parents and grandparents used to give. This is what they did. And it is not proper for me to break the old family tradition. So there might be someone who thinks in this way. They think, well, my parents and grandparents, and extending back to ancestors before that, presumably, had this tradition of making offerings and donations to spiritual practitioners or practicing charity, doing good things for the world. So this is an old family tradition, which has clearly been honored and upheld for a long time. So I should keep doing the same thing. So this is a case where somebody, again, they're not necessarily giving a gift out of any particular wisdom or understanding, or even necessarily out of any particular kindness or compassion, but they're just doing it in order to keep up the old traditions, the old ways. And again, the Buddha says that this also is good karma. This also is something which produces good karma and leads to pleasant conditions, including, again, rebirth as a deva. So even though one is not acting with the loftiest kind of mind, it's still something which brings about good results. So it's still praiseworthy. So this is something which is really important in the suttas. The Buddha, even when he's giving these more limited examples of generosity, he's still pointing out the fact that this is still praiseworthy to perform acts of generosity, even with a restricted or limited mindset. The next example he gives is instead someone might think, ahang pachami ime na pachanti, narahami pachanto apachantanang danang adatum. So one might think, I cook, but they don't cook. And it is not proper for one who cooks to not give to those who don't cook. So this is a very simple example. So one is thinking, okay, there are these people who have vows of living on the offerings of others. people who have vows of surviving entirely on alms food. And it's not right for me to just stockpile all of the food for myself and not offer anything to these other people. These other people who are trying to live an upright and spiritual life with these particular vows, then it's not proper for me to neglect their needs. It would be proper for me to help them out. So this is where we're getting into an attitude which is actually on the side of compassion and kindness. So someone who's actually thinking about the needs of others and considering how to support others, how to nourish them, take care of them, look after them. And it's particularly here a reflection on the limitations of those who have taken on particular vows in relationship to food. Though this can also apply to beggars or people in extreme poverty or situations of food insecurity. It also applies there as well, where one can think, well, these people, because of their economic condition, they don't have enough access to food, but I do. So I can share the food that I have with those who don't have enough. So these attitudes of generosity are not restricted just to supporting spiritual practitioners, but also it extends generally to any act of generosity. For example, in the Dakkhinai Sutta, the Buddha emphasizes that even giving a gift to an animal still produces extremely powerful good karma. And more so when giving to humans, and even more so when giving to virtuous spiritual practitioners. But any gift giving is something which produces strong good karma. Then the next example he gives, he gives the example of someone who reflects. In the past, there were these great sages, and here there's a list of several famous Brahmin sages of the distant past. So legendary or semi-legendary figures from the ancient Brahmanic tradition long before the time of the Buddha. So Attika, Vamaka, Vamadeva, Vesamita, Yamadagi, Angirasa, Bharadvaja, Vaseta, Kassapa, and Bhagu. So these ancient Brahmin sages, semi-legendary figures. So this person thinks, in the past there were these great sages who performed great sacrifices. So this will be mine, giving and sharing. So one thinks, okay, so in the past there were these very wise people who performed acts of sacrifice. So I can also sacrifice some of my personal wealth, some of my personal comfort, some of my personal possessions in order to give and share with others. So here the Buddha is talking about sacrifice, not in the form of wasting or destroying things, or in the form of, for example, killing animals for sacrifice, or burning valuable things or anything like that. But rather, the Buddha talks about sacrifice in the sense of giving, and that we're sacrificing some of our own personal wealth, our own personal comfort, in order to give something to another person. So this is the kind of sacrifice that the Buddha praised, is the act of giving and sharing, because this is a sacrifice which brings benefit to others, as well as helping us to cultivate renunciation and contentment within ourselves. And again, with this kind of mind, one can be reborn as a deva. So again, it produces the same kind of good karmas as the other attitudes of giving. And the next example he gives is, he says, instead one might think, Emang me danang darato chittang pasidati, attamanata somanasang upajayati. So one thinks, giving makes my mind peaceful, happy, and faithful. It produces elation and contentment. And based on that kind of mind, one gives. So this again is where someone is just reflecting on the fact that performing acts of kindness and generosity for other people makes you happy. So it doesn't just help the other person, but actually the giver, the donor, also experiences happiness and joy on account of their own act of generosity. It's something which supports the tranquility of mind, the joyfulness of mind, the clarity of mind, which is a necessary factor of Buddhist practice. So cultivating generosity then is also a form of mind training, a form of purification of mind, which is a necessary component of the development of the path to enlightenment. And then the final example the Buddha gives, and this is the one which the Buddha says is the highest, the most honorable, the most respectable motivation for practicing generosity, is in Pali, it's chitta alankara, chitta parikara. So for the sake of beautifying and equipping the mind. So alankara means an ornament, an object of beautification, jewelry for the mind, beautification for the mind. And parikara means equipment or supplies, things which make the mind more capable, which make the mind more powerful, which make the mind more flexible, more adaptable. So one engages in an act of generosity because one recognizes that this is something which makes the mind beautiful and adaptable. It's something which gives the mind power, and it makes the mind pleasant. It makes it enjoyable. So this is reflecting upon generosity in a different way. So rather than trying to get something in particular, trying to get a particular result in the future, instead we're reflecting on generosity as something which brings beauty to the mind, which makes the mind beautiful. And also something which equips and prepares the mind for the path to awakening. And the Buddha says that this final form of generosity has a much higher karmic potency. So this, the other ones, he says, can lead to rebirth as a deva. But he says that to give with this kind of mind leads to rebirth in the Brahma world. So a much higher form of rebirth. And I wouldn't get too hung up on the details of that. I think the Buddha here is rather making the point that although any form of generosity is something which is inherently valuable, inherently meritorious, the best kind of generosity is to give just with the attitude that giving is something that beautifies the mind. Giving is something that that makes the mind beautiful. And in the sutta, it also says that the Buddha makes this somewhat cryptic remark that somebody who gives with this mind of wishing to beautify the mind, the Buddha says that such a person is a non-returner and does not return to this world. And this is a bit of an unusual remark because normally the condition of being a non-returner is the third stage of awakening, which is attributed with the elimination of the 5 lower fetters, which I won't go into in detail right now, but that includes the elimination of coarse self-centeredness, sakkaya ditthi, as well as the elimination of skeptical doubt and the elimination of any form of sensual desire and any form of aversion, as well as the removal of silabhata paramasa, so this misunderstanding of spiritual practices. So it's interesting that the Buddha here is attributing the stage of non-returner to this attitude of generosity, of giving solely for the sake of beautifying the mind. So that the statement needs to be understood in the context of how the Buddha speaks about the stage of non-return elsewhere in the suttas. Again, a non-returner is someone who has eliminated self-centeredness. Well, actually practicing generosity is a way of weakening and eliminating our self-centeredness, especially when we're giving purely because we recognize that giving is something which is good. Giving is something which prepares the mind for awakening. So then the practice of generosity weakens our self-centeredness. We're also recognizing that the act of giving is something which brings about the conditions of mind which are conducive to awakening. So contrast this to, for example, some of the other examples of in the past, the great Brahmin sages did such and such, so now I'm also going to do such and such. Or in the past, my ancestors behaved this way, so I also will behave this way. Well, that's Silabhata Paramasa. Just to blindly copy ancient tradition without understanding its purpose is a misunderstanding, a misapplication of spiritual practices. So instead, engaging in an act of generosity out of an understanding of its place in the path to awakening, that is using spiritual practices correctly. Also, in order to give, one needs to be willing to let go of one's own desires. In order to let go of something, you need to let go of your attachment to it, your desire for it. So generosity also helps to weaken one's sensual desire. And of course, in order to do something kind for another person, you need to bring up a mind of loving kindness, which means there will be less tendency towards aversion in the mind. So I think the point here is not necessarily that generosity automatically makes one a non-returner, but rather that practicing generosity with this correct attitude, this attitude of beautifying the mind, equipping the mind, practicing generosity with this kind of correct attitude helps us set the foundations for non-returner. It helps us set the foundations for attaining this stage of awakening. So those are a few thoughts on this discourse for the morning. So at this time we can respect the sutta with 3 sadhus, and then I'll see if there's any questions. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And hello to all the people joining in online. So hello to Luisa, Manal, Karuna, John, Bhumika, Gregory, Sud, Jayanta, Hui, Niranjang, and Sering. Welcome to all of you. And Sud says, Dear Bhante, if let's say someone is generous and then later finds out that you were deceived, then how should one act in that setting to be in line with the Dhamma? Well, first off, the act of generosity was already productive of good karma, even if it was based upon someone else deceiving you. If you acted with good intentions, if you acted with a genuinely wholesome mind, then you produced good karma for yourself. And the other person who was deceiving you produced bad karma for themselves. So the proper thing actually is, if you find out later on that you were deceived, is to produce compassion for the person who is deceiving you. Because while you did something good, the other person did something bad. And in so doing, they damaged themselves. They damaged their own mind stream. They damaged their own spiritual well-being. They damaged their own prospects of awakening. So the proper thing is to have compassion for that person, but also to be careful about your interactions with that person in the future. So we're not obligated to put ourselves in harm's way. So if you find out later that someone has been deceiving you, then yeah, you should be more careful with that person in the future. And you might need to avoid them entirely, for their own sake as well as for your sake. And Jerry asks, when the mind is beautified, is that the mind of the donor, doni, or both? Properly speaking, it's the mind of the donor. So the mind of the donor is what the Buddha is focusing on here. So the recipient of the gift is making their own karma. So the kind of attitude one has when receiving a gift is also important, but it's not the focus of this discourse. So when receiving a gift, of course, we should be practicing gratitude, appreciation for the goodness that's been done, acknowledgement of the goodness that's been done, rejoicing together with the donor and the fact that they've done something wholesome and good. Also a resolution to be worthy of the offering and so on. So there's a whole other thing of how to receive a gift correctly. And that's what affects whether or not the recipient's mind is beautified. But discourse, the Buddha is specifically focusing on beautification of the mind of the giver. And Kuruna asks, these two seem very similar. One, when giving this gift, my mind becomes clear and I become happy and joyful. And two, they give a gift thinking this is an adornment and requisite for the mind. Yes, so I'd actually noticed that as well, that there's a distinct similarity between the last two items in this sutta. The difference here is relatively subtle. The difference I see is that the previous one still has a certain element of self-centeredness involved. When giving this, my mind becomes peaceful and happy. This brings elation to my mind. So there's still a certain amount of fixation on me. So that element of egocentrism, of self-centeredness, is something which still diminishes the potency of the gift a bit. Whereas the last one is just recognizing that generosity is an adornment of the mind. So the way it's phrased is there's no me or mine. There's no self-centeredness there at all. There's just a recognition that generosity is something inherently beautiful. So I think that's the critical difference between these last two, is that the second to last one has that element of residual self-centeredness, whereas the final one does not. And that's the last question online. So hello also to Kit, Usha, and Adams. Welcome to all of you. And it looks like there's no more questions, so we'll go ahead and conclude at this time with 3 more sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you all next time.